Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and I'm going to be talking about A Murder at the End of the World, Episode 2. It's called Chapter 2, The Silver Doe. So spoilers for the episode, of course. I had to squeeze this somewhere over the weekend because the new Monarch show started as well, which I didn't know about. So squeezing in this second episode was quite a challenge, but it is Saturday night. I'm squeezing it in, and we pick this episode up right after the apparent death of Bill, which throughout this episode, some differing opinion. Everyone seems to think he's OD'd. There's like an EpiPen in the crime scene, and that seems to be the cause of death. Obviously, there was some blood. We did see that before, but not enough to make anyone think that it's a different cause. Like, that still seems to be what did him in. But of course, the way he died, the look on his face, stuff like that, is enough to convince Darby that there's something else afoot here, that there's a murder potentially, and goes snooping and uses some tech skills to upgrade her ring and get into the room, and does a lot of crime scene stuff. And this is where the flashbacks to this episode really come into play. We basically go back to the start of the story in the flashbacks this episode, which is to say we see her as a child, see her first dead body, which I thought was interesting in the sense that it was kind of weird how several police officers didn't even raise an eyebrow, let alone try to stop this child from walking towards where there was going to be a dead body for her to see. Obviously, when she gets there, her dad just kind of lets her away with it and says she's not doing any harm. You know, she knows enough not to disturb the crime scene and whatnot, but very interesting reaction from the others around them. But next time we see her younger, she's a teenager, and she's actively helping her dad with crime scenes now. She's effectively an apprentice, helping him with the dead bodies, and we actually see where she finds the Silver Doe, the Jane Doe with the silver earrings, which is kind of what started her down her whole path of the book and everything that she wrote about and talked about last episode. And we also see how she meets Bill. So it's kind of a double whammy, actually, in terms of being relevant to what the main plot is in the episode, because you have both the experience she has in crime scenes and analyzing them and studying them and assessing what the cause of death was, the clues that might point to foul play, things like that. We see her do that with the Jane Doe, or the Silver Doe skeleton. We see her theorize about what type of weapon it was, and question the earrings. Like, there's no other items with the body, just these earrings. And there's a great scene afterwards where she's walking through her school and she's looking at all of the earrings on every single girl that she passes, and some of them notice that she's looking and give her a bit of the stink eye. And I wasn't exactly sure what she was looking at here. I mean, I knew she was looking at the earrings, but I wasn't sure what she was deducing from this. But when she meets Bill later on, she basically says that no young women are wearing earrings like this. This is something that an older woman wears, but the body is the remains of possibly a teenager, maybe someone in their early 20s, something in that range. So that doesn't quite track. Now, that's not obviously conclusive. There might be a weird teenager who does wear something that typically only older people wear. There's always exceptions to that kind of thing. But it's a reasonable broad stroke to suspect that there's, that these didn't belong to the victim. And if that's the case, is it more tied to the killer? Is it his calling card? And that sort of sets it on a path. But yeah, so the skills of looking at the dead bodies and analyzing the crime scenes, we see her origins of doing that, so that we understand that she's skilled in that when she gets in the room and starts looking for the clues and questioning what she ends up questioning is, would he be injecting himself on his right arm when he's right-handed? Wouldn't he be using his right hand to inject his left arm? Makes enough sense. Little details like that. The fact that the EpiPen has no fingerprints on it. It feels weird that he would go out of his way to wear gloves to do this, especially when his dead body is not wearing gloves. So just all these little details. But then the other thing, of course, that the flashbacks do, and this is more on the emotional side, whereas the crime scene stuff's more on the practical, this is how she can do this sort of stuff. It's an explanation for that, effectively. the emotional side is that we see how she meets Bill. We see the start of that friendship, that relationship. We see its awkward origins, and the episode even ends not on a big cliffhanger. It doesn't end on a big, moment like the first episode did. It ends on a sweet moment. It ends on the first time they meet in person, and they have this kind of Skype relationship throughout the episode. And that's not to say that they're actively a couple during the episode. There's a couple of little moments where she'll say something that's kind of like a question about if it wasn't so much that he's attracted to her, but because he's talking about how he uses the internet and computers to break down walls, and unlike the real world, you can actually build a bridge anywhere you want or to anyone you want. And she says, "Is that how you see me?" And he kind of chuckles and says, nah, no one can figure you out. A man would die trying. And it's kind of like, a compliment in the moment, but obviously there's a chemistry early on, like almost from the first time they meet each other, there's a chemistry. But I appreciated the attention to detail here, where it shows you a lot of what she's doing on the build up to meeting him. And by that I mean she's she takes the earrings, she's meant to just leave them in the box with the remains, and this is something she's fully trusted to do, is to put the remains back in the the big storage room where all the remains go, specifically all the Jane Does and the John Does. And notably there was a lot more Jane Does than John Does. There was like 2 Johns, and everyone else in the shot was a Jane. We see her take a photo of the earrings and then Google search them, and she's looking for similar earrings, she's looking for similar style, and then she, it's like, okay, that's not working, so she searches for, is there any homicides or missing people connected to silver earrings, and she's sort of digging through that, and eventually gets to what I think was a Reddit page that Bill had set up, where there's one case where someone's saying like, hey, is there any connections to silver earrings or something like that, and she posts that she has something, and he DMs her, and the conversation goes from there. And then when she says she gives a couple of tidbits of information about where the body was found and a couple of things, but it's when she says she communicates with the dead, or the dead talk to her sometimes, that he gives her a link to effectively start up a Skype call. They see each other for the first time, and then it progresses from there, and she's literally talking to him on her phone, even when she's walking around her dad, and she's it becomes this thing that's still this constant obsession. But they're not just talking about the crimes. That's obviously the core of what they keep going back to that. But there's moments here where they're just sitting doing whatever and chatting about whatever. This is clearly a friendship that is blossoming beyond just the core reason that they met in the first place, even though that's still the central thing. And I appreciated all the awkward beats here that felt very genuine, like when he first suggests that they meet in person, which comes about because there's a breakthrough where she finds they have an idea along the way. What if there's a survivor? What if there's someone who's not a Jane Doe, but someone who escaped abduction or something like that, who maybe would have something that connects them to the killer, and it would be like a sign of, oh, this is this guy. And sure enough, she eventually finds a woman who was almost abducted, and there was a detail about silver earrings in the thing. And that's when she's like, hey, we should go and talk to her in person. And he's like, I'll come and pick you up. I can drive to Iowa. And she immediately gets nervous and closes the laptop and makes an excuse to leave. And it's very awkward. It's like all of a sudden this became real. This became not just a guy on her computer screen. This became something that she's going to have to face. And who knows, maybe Bill's dangerous. He called himself Kill Bill, although maybe he just has good taste in movies. That's possible. It sets up here that they know how to communicate in Morse code. There's kind of a sweet introduction to her. Before they meet in person, the big thing he does to try and sort of win her over, to sort of I don't know, build a bridge, I guess, in a, not a literal sense, but in a more human sense. He gets her to go to a specific location, and he's hacked into the lights at this railway line, and he makes them flash in Morse code to say happy birthday, Darby. I think the things that I want to point out here that seem like really important pieces of information that could become something again later is the idea that he can communicate to her in Morse code and she can understand it. That feels like something that might come back up again. And you're probably saying, but he's dead, Peter. How can that happen? Well, she also says in this episode that the dead talk to her sometimes. Now, she does clarify a little bit and says that it's not like a voice, it's not like she's been talked to. This is something that seems to be more introduced here in episode 2, but she sort of describes it as having a connection to them, like putting your hand in a glove and being controlled, or they're kind of guiding her in some way. Like, I'm just saying, if there's a flashing light with Morse code at some point that maybe could be interpreted as Bill contacting her from beyond, it wouldn't surprise me given the elements that have been set up in this episode. Or at the very least, if there's something that could appear to be that at first, but it's just for her for a moment thinking that or something, you know. But these feel like details that have been particularly set up between these two characters, and I think that's an interesting element. And even if it's not literally being communicated, you know, to by the dead, maybe more symbolically being communicated by the dead. In fact, in the context of this episode, in some ways, because in the present day story he's already dead, you could thematically read it as this episode that she's literally being contacted by the dead by the time we get to that scene. Obviously not in this time period in the flashback, but just as an overall sort of like look at the episode, kind of symbolically, you could sort of look at it that way. But yeah, the episode ends with them meeting in person for the first time, and she's nervous. I think one of the things the show does really well with its direction is just, I think it captures the, like I was saying earlier, like the awkwardness of like talking to him for the first time, the nerves about actually answering the video call, the nerves about meeting him in person. I think when she arrives in this town and there's like some drunk people sort of joking around outside, it feels like, oh, she's a teenage girl, this is kind of intimidating, something bad could happen. You know, there was kind of just like a normal sense of real world threat around her without anyone specifically being intimidating. It's not like anyone like made an eye at her or anything like that, but just this idea that she's young, she's on her own, this is a strange place, she doesn't know anyone else. And then not only is she meeting Bill for the first time, he's also the lifeline here. It's the person that he knows. And I also like that he looks very uncomfortable until she shows up. Before he notices her standing there, he looks like he's the odd person out. Like he doesn't know what to do with his hands, and he's sort of looking around all nervous, and he's on his own. And as someone who's a bit of an introvert, I can relate to that feeling in public. I absolutely can. You feel like you're the weird one in the room, and you just don't know how to act around people. I can connect to some of these feelings. But they found each other at their end, and it's really heartwarming, and that adds to the sadness of all the present day story of like him being dead and now her being determined to try and solve it. So yeah, I think that stuff's really good. I think it's really well told. The present day stuff, I kind of alluded to some of this, of course, with her getting into the room. She's motivated after the morning breakfast where they all kind of, some of them are like, hey, we should probably all leave, right? We don't want to like go through with this week if someone's just died. And Clive Owen makes a big speech about how they should, like, when are we going to get these people back in a room together? This is important, so on, so on. Notably, Lee does come up and hug Darby and says she's so sorry. So she clearly like understands what Bill meant to her and is reaching out in a sense. Of course, she looks a little suspicious later when she also sneaks into the room where Bill's body is and is looking around. In fact, for a second, I thought she was going to do the same thing that Darby was just doing, which is investigate the crime scene. Not that we ever heard that she did that kind of thing before, but it also looks like she's looking for something. She's kind of rummaging through his bag and his papers and looking in his pockets and stuff. She's clearly looking for an item. She denies this later on. She is definitely lying, though. She was absolutely looking for something specific. There was no doubt in my mind. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she's bad, or that she's evil, or that she's the killer, or any of these things. Like, I'm not necessarily leaping to those judgments, but there's definitely something that she's not willing to admit to Darby as of yet. But when they get whispering to each other, which, by the way, the filmmaker dude starts talking about co-directing a movie with the AI that runs this place, and given everything that's just went on with the strikes and like people having to fight to make sure AI doesn't come in and just like obliterate everyone's jobs and their rights as workers, is this especially made me think, oh, okay, you know what? I'm losing my respect for you, dude. I'm losing my respect right now. But Lee does encourage Darby to maybe use the same hack she did in the book that belonged to her, that she got from Lee, and maybe suggested that looking, at the cameras, that are, you know, at the front of every door in the hotel. Just don't get caught. So we see Darby sort of going through this process of sort of figuring out how to get into the network, how to get a password, and I won't get into the details of that. It all looked reasonable enough. Like, I'm computer literate, but I also don't. I'm not a hacker. This all felt reasonable enough for a TV show standard anyway. But she gets in, and we get this almost genuine jump scare. Honestly, when she's looking at the camera that's looking at the Bill's room, and she sees Bill going in, and it's like a little heartfelt moment. But she also sees a couple people outside the room, which are just innocent enough. They maybe look suspicious for a second, but they're just passing by or whatever. One guy's like sort of looks angry on the phone, but it doesn't seem necessarily related to Bill. But maybe that'll be important later. However, there's like a jump cut almost to someone wearing a creepy white mask that also has the eyes holes sort of blacked out. I'm sure it's transparent for them, but they clearly knew there was going to be a camera here, whoever it is, so they're covering their face intentionally. That makes sense. So it could be anyone behind there, and it looks like they stand there staring at the camera for a reasonable bit of time, because I thought they were going to do like a horror movie thing here, because Darby gets distracted looking out at the ambulance that's taking away the dead body. That's happening here, and the laptop's just kind of on in the background for a little bit, and I thought they were going to have something happen in the recording on the laptop while she wasn't looking that was going to be creepy. They never did though. They never did, which is not a good or bad thing. It just isn't. I just was kind of expecting a little thing there for whatever reason. Yeah, so I mean that was the gist of the present day stuff. There's obviously some details. I know some comments on the first review wanted to point out, which is something I obviously noticed. I just didn't bring it up in the review. Is befor she got on the plane in episode 1, they took DNA samples and got some forms signed and all the rest, and they claimed it was for, checking like sickness and whatnot, but clearly it feels a little bit more again like they've got our DNA now, that might be important going forward. That did cross my mind. There's also, again, on the subject of trusting technology, we're talking about AI making movies here in this episode. We also at one point have Darby request that the AI stop recording any of her voice commands so that there's no record of her asking all these questions that are helping her with the crime scene. And I'm like, you're just kind of taking his word for it that he's not recording this now. He still might very well be recording it. I mean, by the nature that the AI can hear you means that there is a microphone still picking up your audio. Sure, that doesn't necessarily mean it's been recorded for later playback, but it's hard to just trust that. There's definitely a microphone, and it definitely could be picking, and keeping track of it, even if it tells you it's not. So again, that's an element of trusting technology. We can see where that goes. There was like a few thoughts kind of like going through my head, and I think it's interesting as well that Darby and Bill's entire relationship is built around technology. They met over the internet. They communicated through video calls and Skype and message boards, and it's interesting that how much real it feels when they actually get together in person. And then you've got this AI that's being used constantly in this hotel that they're all talking about being something that is going to be revolutionary. And Clive Owen in this episode even says that the future of everything is collaboration with AI of some kind. Or someone in the room says that. It may not have been him. I think it's interesting that the flashback story starts off with them using technology, but then feels even more heartfelt when they get together. But at the same time, obviously the technology is used for good. I mean, Bill even talks about why he likes using it, why he likes to hack, why he likes to manipulate these things, because it gives him a sense of control. It gives him a sense of manipulation that he can't do in the real world, but he can do it with computers. That's an interesting theme to kind of bring up, especially when you start to mix it with not trusting technology. Can the technology then lie to you? Is it possible that these walls that you can't climb over in the real world, is it possible that technology is going to get to the point where the technology itself is like that? But notably, Darby in this episode does also hack into the security system so she can look at the camera feeds. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting couple of things to put in the same story, and it feels like we're going to be playing with these themes throughout. Certainly at this point, I could very well see this being not an anti-technology show, or even an anti-AI show. I could see this being more of a balanced thing of like there's good and bad that comes with it, and like sort of parsing that as part of the challenge of working with it, of dealing with it, of of whatever, all these things. So I mean, I like that it's making me think of these things. It's making me sort of question these ideas as I'm watching it. But the human story is also very solid, and you see that develop in the flashback story, especially. You see how much it hurts Darby. There's a very extended sequence here, and again, I really appreciate that the show takes time to do this because it never feels like it's dragging anything out. But her just being in her room after the crime scene, not when she goes back and looks at it, I mean at the start of the episode after the murder itself, and she's taken back to her room and given sleeping pills and told to get some rest. Like just the quiet moments of her contemplating that, and then taking the pills and lying on the bed, and just the tear going down her cheek as there's some good music playing and some nice score. It lets you feel these moments. I think if nothing else, I think the Brit and Zal writing directing duo, they're very good despite how weird the elements in their stories can get. And I wouldn't say anything in this story is that weird. This is definitely the most mainstream friendly thing I've seen from them. But even when their stories do get weird, I feel like they're very good at capturing these human moments along the way of everything. And that's why I think when their shows do get weird, I'm along for the ride, because they've got me so hooked and the characters feel so real and fully fleshed out, and the moments feel so relatable so often that when they do encounter something really, really bizarre and otherworldly, it kind of feels like more believable in a way, because you've grounded everything else so much that it feels so fantastical in a way that feels like I'm seeing real people witness something special. And that's a talent, and I think it's these little human moments that were making me think of that as I was watching this particular episode. I think that about does it. Obviously, the first review went on to about 50 minutes. I had so much explaining to do about the setup, and I think this one was very focused. Again, it was very tight, although it wasn't that much shorter. It was still like 62 minutes, but it never really felt like it was wasting time. I think it's definitely a slower paced show, and that it likes to really let scenes breathe, but it never feels like they're just filling time because it's, a prestigious TV show has to hit 60 minutes. It never feels like that. It feels like there's an artistic reason for just about everything being the length that it is. So I'm very curious to get into more of these things, and maybe more of Lee helping Darby, if that's going to be a thing going forward. If we can even trust Lee, I don't know. That's something. Maybe the idea of Darby meeting her hero is going to be one of the themes that we deal with in this show. Yeah, I'm fascinated to see where we go with the flashbacks next, because now I'm expecting flashbacks every episode. I'm expecting that to be a core structural thing with the show, and that was such a thing in the OA. Although here it's more traditional in the sense that they're just kind of interspersed throughout the episode. I would say that's a more normal way of doing it, but they've been so effective up until this point. I do wonder, like, is it all going to be between this flashback story and the first flashback story, because those are like the bookends of that thing, or is there going to be more stuff after Bill left? In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if we do actually get flashbacks of the Bill and Lee friendship or whatever that was. So yeah, I could see us getting other flashbacks from different parts of the timeline as we learn more about the other characters and their interactions. So yeah, I mean, even though they've all been Darby focused so far, it wouldn't surprise me if we get a Lee flashback episode of how she met Bill and how that developed over time. That would actually be really interesting. I can see that happening. Probably not too soon. That sounds like a near the end of the season to reveal some big stuff moments. I could be wrong though. Watch me say that, and then very next episode's going to be that. But very interesting stuff. Excited to see more. There's some more great cinematography this episode. I mentioned the small human moments, which are all made up of great cinematography. Her riding her bike before the light started flashing was all very good, moody stuff as well. Really enjoyed all that. There's a great wide establishing shot of the hotel in this episode in the morning before she wakes up, and you can just see the full mountain in the background, and that was just kind of gorgeous. Just lots of really nice stuff to keep the atmosphere and the mood going. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to episode 3, and very excited that I've got 5 weeks of talking about this show, of looking forward to it, and kind of thinking about it after the fact. I remember when we did the OA, and there was this sort of pressure to get through it as quickly as possible and try and get an episode done every day, pretty much, because it was a binge show, it was a Netflix show. And I do prefer weekly releases, and I'm really happy that I get to experience a show from this creative team that way, because I do think the time to think about it and come back in and sort of refamiliarize myself with the characters each week and the themes and the ideas and get the next chapter. I think I think it's the better way to experience TV, and I'm happy that I get this from this team. So hopefully it does well, and hopefully we get more from this team. But thank you very much for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. I appreciate it a lot. Just being here, obviously, you can hit the like button. That helps out. People find the channel and the show. But Patreon is where you can support with some money and to help keep the lights on, get some bonuses, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. Otherwise, though, that is me, so thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Check out all the other shows I've reviewed, both new and old. Some with other people, some with just me, talking to myself, like this one. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?